All right, great. Thank you for joining us, everybody. And do some quick introductions. My name is Chris Catania, and I'm the head of community for ESRI. And we're excited to be here to talk about, migrations and everything that goes along with that. It's a very important topic, as many of you know. It's critical to community success and moving community forward. So we have a very interesting qualified panel to go through. So I will be guiding us through, and we'll go ahead and kick off with some introductions. Michael, if you wanted to start off.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for inviting me on the panel. It's great to be able to speak with Elijah and John, and you as well, Chris. So my name is Michael Davenport. I'm a sales engineer with Higher Logic. I had previously done implementation work, integration. I actually started in support before moving over to our sales engineering team. And another part of this introduction is talking about the planning period around a migration. What I've typically seen in the field is it can take anywhere from 3 to 4 months to complete a full migration. And a really important part kind of going into that is you need to break it down in two ways. There's the business side of things, and then there's the technical side. What goes into exporting the data? Are the data types all supported? The business side is very important. As you're looking at a new vendor, is their procurement. Weird thing, if you say, well, we can complete it in 90 days, that's actually 72 work days. So you need to really look at the granular of these migrations and recognize that it might not always be a one-to-one perfect match. But if you can migrate to 90%, that's what I view as a successful migration. And so excited to dive a little bit more into that today.
Great, thanks. And I forgot to mention too, when we do the introductions, obviously tell you who you are, where you work, and as Michael just did, thanks, Michael. Share your experience and what you think is the ideal time needed to migrate an existing community in months. So go ahead and share that, Elijah.
Yep. Hey, my name is Elijah Hardin. I am a senior manager for the professional services and partner enablement team here for Verint. I've been working in the community space for about 14 years now, so quite some time, feels like forever, but I enjoy it. I like it. Migrations are a large part of what we do, and Michael kind of teed this off perfectly, right, in terms of the two aspects of business and the technical and the duration, things like that. I agree, 3 months would be about the quickest I think you could do one. But again, it depends on data set sizes and things like that really play a heavy factor into, planning that out. So I'm glad to be here too. Thank you.
Right. And John?
Yep. Hi, everyone. Yep. Glad to be here. My name is John Reynolds. I'm the Vice President of Technology at Social Edge Consulting. And we're just a few months away from our 10th anniversary as a consulting partner for leading social collaboration and community platforms used by enterprise and small to medium-sized businesses. So I would agree with Michael and Elijah. The sweet spot is around 2 to 4 months. Often clients think they can do it quicker. We try to reinforce the process and really stick to that process, and the time frame has proven out. And however, there are special circumstances. We know the pandemic. The last 18 months, of course, a lot of companies have had to move very quickly. And, you just look at the schedule and just make sure everybody's committed to what's getting done. Other factors involved, but it's a multi-month process to get clients from one place to another.
All right, great. Thanks, John. All right, so we have some really great questions to kind of kick around, and as everybody has a chance to respond, so we'll start out with our first one. So we started the intro here, talking about the ideal amount of time, but having gone through several migrations myself, I know that there's different phases. It's not just about moving the content, this and that, and everything. There's a whole process. There's a phases. So I wanted to ask each of you, what about the three, or what about the different phases of an effective migration, and what does that look like from each of your perspectives? So John, I know you just wrapped up, but we'll go to you first.
Sure. Yep, no problem. Yeah. So the three teams involved are going to be the platform that the client is migrating to, the customer themselves, and then again, in our case, us as the partner, and we'll have a team assembled with different roles. The teams we usually staff for the migration are a technical lead, a migration engineer who understands data. Data nerds is thrown around a lot, but for a migration, you do need a data nerd. And then strategic work, community management, and then if there's any light design needed, we would always bring in a designer. We try to keep the phases fairly simple. We lump a lot into a planning phase, and that's where those different columns will meet directly with the equivalent team members on the customer side. And then normally it's some sort of staging process where we will migrate a sample bit of content to a staging area where it can be reviewed by the client. We'll eventually, do any remediation, of course, any implementation of strategic plans done in the planning stage. And then we'll have a migration event with really the goal of the migration event to be as little downtime as possible. You often think that if you have to migrate all the content at once, that you may have a multi-day outage, right? You may have a weekend outage. Really, our goal is to have, as quickly as we can switch from one platform to another, to be able to cut you over. So we have some different techniques that we use there.
Great, thanks, John. And then Elijah and Michael, what do you guys think about the different phases of effective migration, and what do you guys do when as far as organizing the steps and getting clients ready?
Yeah, and I think that to John's point, planning is a heavy focus for us. The data mapping exercises, making sure that everyone's kind of marching on the same path, and we understand this piece of data is going to this spot in the new platform. Michael mentioned a little bit earlier about mapping and things not matching one-to-one. We try our best to place things where they need to go, but yeah, we spend a lot of time in planning just to make sure that once we get into those data transformation and actually moving the data, that there aren't any gotchas. But yeah, we break ours into about 6 phases: planning, then pulling the data out of the legacy platform, pushing the data into the Verint community platform, testing, launch, and then post-launch support. Of course, we have any number of subtasks under those phases in terms of, things that developers are doing, things that project management is doing, things like that. But yeah, those are kind of our high-level buckets. And I think John called out a pretty good point about reducing downtime. We tend to do like a diff migration a week or two before production. That way, when we do go to production on that day, we're just migrating a small amount of data. If we're dealing with 1 million posts, for example, we can get 990,000 of those over ahead of time, and then we're just migrating a small data set there. Another thing that we try to make sure we pay attention to are SEO and redirects that go along with the migration. So, we want to make sure that, when the legacy URL is hit, it does flow, well into our platform. So, but yeah, and I guess the other part of that question was talking about organization. We have checklists. We share those with the customers. We walk through those. We make sure everybody's kind of aligned. And we kind of start with a base checklist, and then depending on what the legacy platform is and where data is going, we kind of alter that checklist a little bit. So, yeah.
Yeah, so Erica Kuhl and Brian Oblinger actually posted something really interesting in the past week on LinkedIn. So they talked about a community roadmap, and they broke it out into 4 sections. So they had people, content, technology, and experience. Typically, we see migrations fall into content and technology, right? What does the technology support? And what content are you going to be bringing over? And so one of the first things I think you have to look at in phase 1 is, what features do you have now? What features do you need based on what you're seeing and how you're measuring engagement? And then what does the vendor provide? For example, Facebook doesn't have announcements, right? But I know HireLogic has announcements. So how do we carry that over in some way? Is it different? So you really need to look at what features that vendor can go in and provide. And then how much data are you going to be bringing over? As an example, a lot of the organizations we deal with are support communities. They want to come over and they say, we've been managing a support community for 8 years. Have you had any UX updates in that time frame? Because if so, probably only the last year and a half or 2 years of data is necessary. And so this is the pre phase here, right? Where you go in to really think about, what do we need to bring over? Do you have an ideation tool, but no one uses it? Do you have ideation in one source, discussions in another source, and knowledge base in another source? Those are 3 different sources. How many different objects go into that? And so that's a really, really important phase of this entire thing. And so step 1 is always going to be, what data of your users should be exported and what features do you need? The next step goes into vendor evaluation, right? Once you've mapped that out, you have to make sure that the vendors that you're seeing, that you're going in and evaluating, support all the features that you have. And then to what Elijah and John had mentioned, how can we make sure it carries over the exact same way? They got much more into the nitty gritty of what goes into those data migrations. And most enterprise solutions have some type of SOW that will go into what the vendor needs, how much data, how much content, is there remapping of hyperlinks? I'm glad that Elijah brought up SEO, because that's a huge part of it. I mean, is the metadata coming over when you go and do these? And then the actual migration period, a lot of people don't realize this, can take 6 to 10 weeks to actually complete. I think in a presentation our director of implementation did, he said, plan, execute, review, rinse and repeat on every single step. And then I talked about it earlier, it's not as big of a deal, but there might be stakeholders in other departments, right? The data export might not be taking place. That could be by a partner. If you're doing a migration in November, there tends to be a week in November that nobody works. And so you have to take those different things into account. I think the breakdown of 6 separate phases is a really good way to look at it. I have it broken out the same way. So I have contract legal platform review, a kickoff internal meeting with different stakeholders, the data export, the data work, the actual implementation, design and branding, and then testing and review. And that's how I've broken down these different phases, which tend to be into a 90 to 120-day period.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, each of you as well, on that. I wanted to hit on one topic before we get to the next one, about the phases. And I'm sure you guys are involved in this, but maybe not as much as the client. And it was the topic of selection of the platform. I know in previous experience, a selection of a platform for migration, even if you know that you need to migrate, right, can kind of be that pre-stage before you actually engage with someone like yourselves with helping us move. But I was wondering if you guys could share any experiences or insights into what clients can do, to learn more about and prepare themselves for that selection process. Because I know I've been in, different internal stakeholder conversations. Sometimes I might call them battles, sometimes learning moments, whatever you want to call them. Platforms might not get selected. Some do, some don't for various reasons. But I was wondering if you guys could share a little bit about what have you learned by being either, sometimes you've probably been selected and sometimes you haven't. And what have you gleaned from those experiences with clients during the selection process, which kind of, sets up what you guys were just talking about, those different phases. So Elijah, or I guess anybody who wanted to jump in.
Yeah, I can go. One thing that I did have a note kind of further down in my notes about making sure that the customer understands the functionality of the new platform. And the more they know about, the functionality and features that we offer compared to, what they were on their legacy system, the better off we'll be, right? Because Michael mentioned ideation. Somebody might not even know ideation exists in a platform. So we try to do our best during pre-sales and the sales cycle to explain all of the functionality that the platform has. We try to ask questions that we know they might not be asking, because a lot of times, you run into, they could be asking a question, but really looking for a different answer, if that makes sense. So, they could be asking about a forum, but they really want a wiki or a blog or something, just something along those lines. I know it's really a generic answer, but, we try to think about what is the customer really asking? What are they trying to get? And what are they, what's going to make them successful? Another piece, and I also have these down further in my notes, how do they measure success? And how do we, use the platform to help them, measure success and that ROI from their standpoint? It could be, number of new registrants, it could be interactions, it could be content, any number of those things. So we just want to make sure that, as we're going through those data mapping exercises and trying to ensure that we're setting them up and architecting their community correctly, that we're thinking about those items as well.
Yeah, I don't know if I can top that response. I agree with everything Elijah said there. I mean, I break it down as features, integrations, and then how to measure success, right? I mean, if a customer doesn't integrate with your CRM, or sorry, a vendor doesn't integrate with your CRM, that might wipe them out completely, right? Most vendors all support something like Salesforce or HubSpot or one of those larger players. If one doesn't, are they really supporting your needs? Does one platform specialize in event-based communities and your organization is so focused on community around events and webinars? Most community platforms oftentimes built around the support use case, right? I have a question on product A, I have a question on how to solve software problem B, and I can go in and answer that. You need to take a step back. I loved what Elijah said around how do they measure success? Is there metrics on being able to see how many registrants or new members you have? Are there metrics on hits on the overall site? How do they price that, right? That's another important piece. If they're pricing on number of hits to the website, is that something you need to take a closer evaluation at? So I always look at how success is measured, how success is charged is really important, and integrations, and then of course feature set, right? If your main goal is I want to get more event attendees, but all they have is a feed of events and can't provide any other things behind that, well, you might want to take a look at a few other vendors as well.
Yep. Yeah, and I appreciate you letting the partner go last here. So, I mean, as far as the selection, we're obviously in a different position. However, from our standpoint, customers come to us. We've either worked with them previously, we helped them launch their current community, or we're coming in cold. Either way, we always do recommend going through a contracted project to help them evaluate the great platforms that are out there. Because as Michael said, it depends on what they're after. They may find one that has just a little bit more focus in that area. It's event management, collaboration, blogging, whatever it may be. And it's not just, you're not going to make a choice from, 4 or 5 initial demos, right? You're going to have to look at your use cases. But not only look at your use cases, it's the assumption that your community has been online for a few years. So what's working, what's not, but also what are your expansion goals, right? Oftentimes, the point of contacts that we work with a migration were not there through the whole community journey, right? Maybe they even just inherited the role and they need to level set on, where did this community start, where it's now, and where it needs to go. So we always do recommend that. And, again, we've certainly in the past been able to help clients pick Michael's, Elijah's, and other platforms out there, and then stay with the client through that journey and migrate them successfully.
Yeah, Elijah and I might be biased at our answers as vendors. So I appreciate that perspective, John.
Yep. Yes. Ethics is important. And I do, without joking, I do mean that it is very important.
100%.
Excellent. Thanks. Thank you all for those kind of added on questions and responses. I think those are really good things. So just to recap that real quick too, is that, have requirements, right? Clients need to have the requirements, know what they want to expand. John, you mentioned a really good point there about expansion goals. Kind of know that, bring that to the table to that selection process, and the use cases requirements, right? I think that's the trinity, I guess, of things that you want to have, and I'm sure there's more, but those are really good points to do, to bring into a selection process and that kind of that pre phase. All right, so let's move on to the next question. You guys, everybody doing good? Yep. All right. Cool. All right. So we got relationships, right? We all love relationships, and I think that's part of the reason why we get into community is to build relationships, but more specifically, the relationship between the client and the platform vendor, I think is really important. There's been experiences of good and bad and everything. So tell us a little bit more about, like, what do you guys think from a vendor partner perspective? What makes an ideal client? And Elijah, if you want to.
Sure, I'll go first.
Yeah,
sure. So yeah, for me, an ideal client is one that's available, engaged, responsive, and motivated. So, we talked about this a little bit. Migrations, they take time. Some people come to us and think that they're going to get these migrations done in a couple of weeks. They're not. We need to make sure that, we understand, hey, this is going to be a multi-week, maybe multi-month project. And we're going to need you to be involved and engaged and responsive during that time. There's going to be a lot of back and forth as we go through planning and the data mapping and the transformations and kind of all the decisions that need to be made up front. One that knows their existing community well. A lot of times, as I think it was John mentioned, they might not be the person or the community manager that's been there for months or years. They could have just had this handed off, and that just makes it a little bit tougher to make sure we're getting everything put into the right buckets when we move it into the Verint community platform, from my standpoint. So somebody that knows their existing data structure, someone who has access to subject matter experts, potentially on the legacy platform side, as we connect to APIs or need a database backup or whatever it may be, just making sure that we can get those things. But I think more than anything, it's just somebody that's motivated to, get that data moved over, get in the trenches with us, and make sure that everything is coming over as expected.
Yeah, I think as you mentioned, motivated, but also, the single point of contact, much different. It's a little bit different than a new community sometimes, because sometimes the new community, it's maybe one of a number of other projects a person is managing, right? But here with communities, you've got a dedicated community manager. They've currently working on the community, and sometimes you have to recognize that job is often not stopping either. They have to maintain the existing community while they're migrating. But a single point of contact, is huge. Another aspect of an ideal client, I'd say, is adaptability to change. And gotta be careful there. I mean, nobody really, you haven't met the perfect person who adapts, extremely well to change. But the quintessential example I always give with a migration is it's just like moving from one house to another. With people, with users, content, and groups, that's equivalent to your family, your furniture, and the house, right? Hopefully your family isn't going to change too much, right? So you want to move that user data over as one-to-one close match as possible. The furniture is your content. And again, that's going to change a little bit, right? Because you're going from one platform to another. The terms are going to be a little bit different. The types of content are going to be a little bit different. Right, the couch that worked in your old house isn't going to work in your new house, but a majority of things, for example, like blog posts are traditionally the same across platforms. Those things will come over as is. And then lastly, your places, that's often where we see the most change, right? Because you're going from one house to house, unless you bought the exact same house, as I mentioned earlier. That's where we get the user acclimated to the difference in structures between platforms. And so we work with the client to adapt to that change and make them feel comfortable about the move. And then lastly, with the ideal client, is we want to make sure that we set the expectation that we don't want to over customize the new community to behave like the old community, and have that as a theme throughout, that we are not out to make your new home exactly like the old home, because there's a reason you're purchasing the new platform. It's going to have features that you can take advantage of. Again, always the hope is that you're going to a better platform. Take advantage of those features, but also don't try to customize or over customize the new platform just to transition the user experience, because probably the most reason is going to be costly. It's going to be costly to do that and put you at risk to possibly an interruption to the user experience. That's why I'd say would make an ideal client on those 3 points.
Yeah, a few add-ons to things John said. I think you made some really good points. I might steal your home moving analogy there. I think
Good
that was
analogy.
Really, yeah, it was very good. Another group of people that don't like change, your users don't like change, right? That's another common thing that we see. And so we always feel that an ideal customer has communicated with your users that you are migrating to a new platform. If one day they're just on a new spot and a number of things have changed, they might get frustrated about that. And so we often advise on doing 60 to 30 and 15-day updates to them. We're moving to a new solution. There might be a few changes that you see along the way. So that's another thing I'd like to add on to John's point there. I think another really important thing for an ideal client is one that has the community use case ironed out and the data that they would like migrated ironed out, and then are realistic with their timelines. That's something that is really, really important. Elijah and John have both mentioned about how some people are like, oh, we want to do this migration in 2 weeks or 3 weeks. It's so difficult to do, and for a few reasons. What you don't want to happen is to plan your migration within the same week that your other system or the other platform you're covering from might be shutting down. Is your contract over? Is your services just going to end at some point? Few things could happen in that instance. One, if they want to keep it alive for 1 month, they could price gouge you to try and keep you there. And then two, you need to make sure that the export they're going to give you is a supported file type. It's a supported data type. Most vendors have specific file types that they prefer. Generally, there's some very widely supported ones, MySQL, XML files. But if the vendor you're exporting from doesn't supply that, that's something you're going to want to get ahead of. And some organizations come to us and they say, well, we haven't told them that we're migrating. That's totally up to you if you want to do that. It's very important that you at least plan for 30 days in advance, at least, if you're migrating from another system, because you just don't know how that export's going to go. And then even if you do get the proper export, how long is it going to take the migration team for your new vendor to remap all of that data? Those are questions you need to be asking yourself in the early stages before migrating.
Yeah, I agree. And we have seen that to Michael's point. We have seen where it's taken weeks just to get the data exports for us to work with. So that's might not be factored into your plan, but yeah, it's a good point to make sure that you're planning weeks in advance just to get the data, access to the data, even if you're not telling them. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And we've seen types of platforms that run the gamut as far as where we get our content from. Some platforms, for one reason or another, they're leaving that platform, but there's an API available. Well, it's great. We can get as much out from the API as possible. Other times it's a file share that's under Larry's desk, right? We're just given a lump of content and we have to reverse engineer it, but yep.
And if anyone's happened to be listening to this who is going into net new community, ask the vendors you're evaluating what the export process is like when the contract is over, if you want to leave at any point in time. Ask what file type it's in, ask if it's free, if it's an additional cost to get an export, even if it's brand net new community. That's a really important question to ask. If you're going to tender, include it in your RFI, RFP questions, so it's something you have in a document of some sort.
Yeah, it's a great point.
Yeah, all fantastic points. Yeah, and just to highlight a couple of those. Again, nice one on the house metaphor. I think that's definitely. I've actually been. I did a move and a remodel at different points during my community management, community professional, career here, and that's been very tangible, very very relatable. So definitely a good analogy, good metaphor. And I think the other point you guys had made too, I want to emphasize, was the not to over customize. I think I've learned from that in the past. I think that's a important point to highlight too. About not wanting to just reduplicate. And hopefully you've talked to your top users in the community. You've talked to the internal stakeholders, and you can get a good sense of what they really like and what they're hoping to see, and that you use that to to guide the migration and also manage the expectations and manage, the change management aspect of going from a different platform to a new platform, I think is important to highlight. So before we move on to the next one, I wanted to ask you guys real quickly too, if what about expectations? So if you guys, you're talking with a client and maybe this didn't come up in the pre-planning and you're in a situation where there's a gap in expectations and you have something that maybe should have been talked about, didn't get addressed, and here it is, and you have to address it. How do you manage those gaps in expectations and in the moment, and maybe even a little bit to preempt those and avoid those? But what do you do for those in the moments where you've realized a gap in expectations with a client?
Yeah, so I can take this one. I've seen it from both sides, from the implementation side when we start implementing the product, and then from the sales side. If you're going and evaluating a new vendor, you're going to want to make sure that they have some type of SOW around migration. If they don't have any SOW around the migration, that's going to be a red flag, because it might mean that they've never done one before. And so that's a really, really important question to go in and ask. And make sure that they're going to be that you're going to be upfront with your users about this, so that Chris, I think you just made a really good point. You've talked to your champions and your stakeholders so that they're aware of what's going to be happening and you've gotten feedback from them. That might change the expectations you have. So those are really important steps to go on and evaluating a new vendor. If you get into the implementation stage and you've already signed on with a new member and there's a gap in the expectation, what I always would do, I would plan a call with the sales rep on that team and the vendor, and we would talk out what's expected and what we're going to be doing. I mean, these are always going to be phone conversations. Every vendor should be willing to hop on the phone for things like that, and ask for red lines and contingencies in your contract around making sure that you know exactly what is expected. That's where, fortunately, procurement departments do such a great job.
Yes. And Michael, to add on to that, I think during the process of evaluating, and then once you've selected, is to have very clear must-haves, right? Because oftentimes the first question to a platform about talking about the features you have is it's not like tell me what features differentiate you from your competitors. Sometimes it's, do you allow ratings on threaded comments? Or it's like a super micro feature. And we understand that those sort of things are important to your end users. But thinking more bigger picture about what's going to continue, and you're not going to lose functionality between in the migration. That's always important. So being really clear in the just before selection that these features have to be there, and having demonstratable, evidence that happens, and then saying, yes, to use the term, the devil is in the details. Some small details may be different, right? Because it's easy to say, then you kick off the project, you have a great kickoff, you have very, clear steps going forward. And then in the first meeting, somebody says, oh, I didn't realize it didn't have that. It's just like, well, we've been talking for a long period of time here about what was important, and that is a detail. And there are other things that are going to be differentiators in helping you explore that that new platform. So, as far as managing the gaps, as I said, you come to the table and you talk it through, having the reference to some of the initial documents. Certainly having records of what may have been said. Or not said is understanding, but again, hopefully you're through proper planning. I can say maybe just with an exception or two, it doesn't you don't get to that point of an uncomfortable meeting.
Yeah, and that's for us too. Is we have we try to document all the data elements that are getting moved over, and again, it comes up every migration. You're going to have something that you're like, well, wait, what about this? And it's just, for us, it's an open conversation. I think for everyone, it just needs to be an open conversation about, okay, what was missed? What's the impact? What's the level of effort to get it where you want it to be? Those things, it's kind of in addition to what John and Michael said about making sure you have all your planning done and documentation, and you've gone through the features and functionality and seen the demos. All that, of course, absolutely has to be done. Other than that, should just be an open conversation to figure out how to resolve the issue, and go from there. Whether that's adjusting hours, change requests, whatever it might be, just always open. Yeah, communication.
And it's not abnormal for things like that to get lost in translation, right? Like a small thing like for our ideation tool, we have downvotes. Some other systems don't allow upvotes and downvotes on different items. And so it's not abnormal for you to have a different expectation going in. But I think what we're all echoing here is just, of course, make sure you can hop on the phone and talk through it, have weekly meetings with the vendor to make sure that you're staying on track and those expectations are still being managed and are updated regularly.
Yeah, and I was thinking to yours about upvotes and downvotes. I was thinking permission structures between the platforms are so different. They all kind of do the same thing, maybe just in a slightly different way. So that's one that we run into and try and get ahead of early on as well. But
permissions between systems have two interesting characteristics. Number one is that the platforms rarely allow you to extract the permission scheme, right? So it's often not migratable. Right. Yeah. And then the second is often that's what one of the main differentiators between platforms, right? There's different ways to securing or organizing access to content. So, one of the things that we will say very clearly on is gonna be a lot of work in mapping from A to B, and we'll put in that work to do that configuration for you.
Yeah, you guys are bringing up some really, really great conversations or points in the conversation here about making sure that SOW is pretty thorough. Procurement. Again, can't stress that enough. Just making sure it's a lot to go through at that stage, but man, it can really save you down the road with that. But you guys are hitting that topic pretty good, which is good because it's key. Have that key conversation up front, go through every line item that you can as thoroughly as you can, align internally. But like you said, gaps happen, expectations need to be adjusted throughout the entire project. Sounds like you guys have all been in those moments, and just keep that conversation open and just talk through it. So on to the next topic, content, right? I mean, we wouldn't have communities without content, right? We got questions, ideas, all the different things, documents, blogs, you name it, right? So how do you guys go about guiding clients, and knowing what to take and what to leave behind? Kind of using our house analogy earlier, John, that you mentioned. How do you know what to put out in the dumpster? Put in the storage. I guess storage would be archiving in that case. Or how do you say, we're just gonna only take this and move it? How do you do that? Because that can be it's a tough one, right? Because we want to take everything. We think everything's valuable, but sometimes a fresh start or a trim down your use cases. So how do you guys recommend and how do you guide clients when migrating, knowing what to keep, bring with you, and what to leave behind? Michael, go for it.
Yeah, for sure. This I thought was the hardest question on here because it's so different based on every single organization. It's also different based on use case. I think there's a simple sentence to look at it, but for anyone listening, it's not as simple as I'm about to say it right now. So in a simple fashion, what's used? What are your users looking at? In your current system, what are the most leveraged features that you have? Now, if you have a community that has a lot of content on it, but no interaction, is there any point in moving that over at all? Should you just bring users and web pages over? Things like that. Should you start completely net new? That becomes an evaluation of, do we need to migrate all together? Like, do we need to migrate content over? Or do we just need to keep it the same? If you have a community of 25 people and tons and tons and tons of content that's interacted with, then let's bring all of that content over. There's been some interesting community papers written around breaking out different use cases. So support communities are extremely common. We tend to say that the information stays relevant for 2 years. And we'll say, bring 2 years of information. Are you sure you haven't had any updates if you've been running it for 10 years? Other types of communities are more marketing focused. And I'll say, in your analytics, do you have blogs or stories that are being shared that get significantly more hits than other ones, right? So in our community, our most viewed page is our blog. We get about 100 to 150,000 blog views monthly, which we love to see, of course. We should bring over all of those. We would never migrate off our own platform, but but we would bring all those over if we ever did. So I would evaluate that. Other communities are more about a sense of belonging and a little bit more niche. And you kind of just want to see, what are the trends of the industry? Is there some type of outdated software? Is there an outdated business use case? Project managers are always updating their project plans, right? So if you have resources that are no longer relevant, that's not really necessary. So there's a huge discovery phase that goes into this, where I'll hop on a call with the data engineer, but I also ask that the community manager and some type of executive sponsor hop on the call, where I'm asking a lot of these questions. How many sources are you pulling from? How many objects are there? By objects, I mean discussions versus events versus resources versus people, different things like that. And then what do the metrics say that users are interacting with, and how are they interacting with it? So again, that's simple, but this is the longest phase and the longest part of the entire migration process outside of actually doing all the data pieces of it. And it's very important to look at what's being used, how people are interacting. And Chris, I still love the point you said, ask your users. What do they want that's still going to be brought over? That might be the most important part of this whole thing.
And to your point, we have customers. I mean, when we start, everybody always just wants to bring all the content over. Just bring it all over. That's kind of how the conversation starts. And then we go from there in terms of like data retention policies that they might have. We have some customers with a data retention policy of 8 years, some with 3 years, some none at all. And they just want to get rid of content that nobody is looking at or interacting with, to Michael's point. But yeah, another thing that comes into play is, does the legacy system, if you're pulling data out of APIs, do their APIs support timeframes, right? So if you say just pull over the last 2 years, can we do that? Is that available? Sometimes we have to pull over all the content, then trim, kind of once we get it into our platform. And then yeah, it's just an open discussion around archiving and what are people using this? Are they not using it? What do the views look like? Might somebody find this helpful in 3 or 5 years? If you sunset a product, and it's a support community, to Michael's point, if you sunset that product or that version, do people still need to get to it? Are people still using it? Those type of things come into some of those discussions.
Right. Yeah, it's you guys covered 99% of it. You need to keep some of the things you're legally obligated to keep. You may want to look at just throwing some random searches in Google on your current community if it's public, and seeing what are the most popular things. And also, I think we're going to talk soon about a migration worksheet, right? It may be surprising what are some of your more popular groups, and what some of your least popular. That can help you make a decision. But one interesting thing, and again, this is hopefully what either partners or platforms, since we've done this many times, will have most of the times enlighten a client, is that deleting can often have the side effect of reducing your experts' reputations. So oftentimes the migration has to, right, if a great user, let's say Sally, has 10,000 points and she has an expert badge. Well, you may be able to bring over the expert badge, but the points, you may not be able to say, like a video game, just assign 10,000 points, right? You have to build up that reputation. If you go delete some of the content that they removed to build up that reputation, right, you can then cause an imbalance for a lot of your experts. So I guess since I started the moving analogy, I got to finish it. We will normally bring over everything. We don't usually like to cut large amounts before we migrate, but when we migrate it over, we'll just put it all, like everything that's not being placed in an area that all users can see, we'll just create like an archive group or a storage group and just put everything else there so that at least it's there, and that will keep the users' content creation reputations intact.
That's a good point. And if there's content that you find afterwards that you do want, you can always move it out of that archive group into, a more public area.
Exactly.
Yeah, you always want to have an export of all the data. Yeah. Every single company has a Yoda, a Yoda employee of some sort. It's because they have all that information stored somewhere from some old legacy system, and they go and access it in Excel or something like that. And it's super important to have, even if a product is becoming discontinued and you have one customer on it, you still have the documentation on it, whether you're sharing it or not.
Yeah, no, that's great stuff, guys. And do you guys have any thoughts on the? I think one of you had mentioned the impact on searches. SEO impact during the migration, and when in regards to content, and how do you guide clients on that? Or what are some thoughts on making sure that you don't? I know in some cases it's unavoidable. It will happen, and then Google does its thing and everything. But I was just curious what you guys guide clients on as far as going back to our previous talk about expectations, but what about SEO and content and the migration process? Anybody, go ahead.
Yeah, so we build, it's important, SEO important, especially after a migration. We do from our side is we build redirects down to the page level. So you try to access, URL 1 on the old platform, we route that to the correct content in our platform, and we kind of build those out during the migration. As you move a blog post, we log that redirect. Move another blog post, log that redirect. So it's kind of an iterative thing, and at the end, we should have a sizable, redirect map that we can use for testing, and we'll test that out in staging, of course, before production. Catch those. I think John mentioned posting some of your URLs into Google and seeing what you get. That's an easy way to test. Just put your URL into Google, go down the first page, and just start testing those. You can pull off. I won't get too technical about it. There's ways to test those even in staging. So we can go through full testing and staging before we even get to production. But yeah, it's definitely important. Definitely something we factor into all of our migrations.
I would say you want to make sure the vendor can hopefully maintain as much of that SEO as possible. The Google console allows you to go over and map over new URLs and new domains. So you're going to want to go into that if you're using the Google console right now to tell that system that you're moving to a new platform. Essentially, there's going to be new IP addresses associated with it. Another thing worth noting, and a lot of people don't know this about SEO, is they look at accessibility on the new platform that you're going to. So Google's actually going to check to make sure that the sites that you're going to are fully accessible. It's another question you can ask early on. But I think John made some really good points about just running searches to see how the SEO is. I mean, that's the best way to go in and test it out.
Yeah, no, it's great. And one thing too, again, from to add on the previous experience, is that to really work closely with, I know all organizations are different, but work with, if it's in your marketing team, SEO person, that expertise. I think that's that person, whoever does your SEO for you, whether it's your web or your community site, including them in the, in that stage. In some cases, even in the procurement and the SEO stage, to know that that's where that SEO piece is going to come in, and so that they know when to contribute, and that's covered. Because if you don't, and if your community is really embedded into your overall web experience, and it's not accounted for, not on the radar during the migration and post migration, it can cause some metrics to go down or all adjust in a way that people maybe weren't expected. So something to keep in mind as well. But thanks everybody. Those are good ones. Got to talk about SEO real quick, right? before we I would feel incomplete without talking
absolutely.
about that, right?
And it's important. And a lot of times
Yeah.
for us, it doesn't come up until the end. So it's like, oh, what about our redirects? Are those going to work? And then we're like, yep, we have them. But yeah, it should be like, I think to Michael's point, it should be part of planning and thought through up front and making sure it's top of mind.
I just think it's crazy too, because it does not get as much importance, but when you think of how much of your referral traffic comes to your community through Google and through search engines, it's should be at the top of your near the top of the list, considering where users go to find your community, which is search engines a lot of times.
Yeah, and even the metrics of users once they're on the community, we had one client say, well, we have a lot less clicks, we have a lot less views. And we were able to show them that the users were getting to their content faster from the old platform, or on the new platform compared to the old, right? So a dip may be a positive sign. You want to improve the user experience.
That's a good point.
Yep, metrics have context. Absolutely, good point. Thanks, John. All right, so next question, strategy, right? And strategy guidance, I think is an important piece. We've kind of been hitting on it in different parts of our conversation so far, but I want to dive in a little bit deeper on how you guys do guide clients on providing strategic guidance, and not necessarily just on content, but there's a lot of different things that you guys have mentioned that we've talked about, related to engagement, change management, all these different things. So what's your guys' approach, for guiding clients regarding strategy and how to do that, whether that's, before the migration, during, after, the all important post-migration, and kind of having that full, that full conversation on the strategy side. So John, do you want to take that one first?
Yeah, and I think that it's easy to just say, the use cases, and to help those keep moving forward. I think I'll speak from a technology standpoint specifically. What's new? How do I apply new community concepts on this new platform to my strategic outcomes? And I'll give an example in both my colleagues' features. With Verint, there is a new articles content type, and the articles migrates from a previous wiki style type documentation, or it's categorizable, et cetera. And it's the client may not have an experience with how can I apply that. If I have a support and documentation use case for my community, how can I appropriately use this new feature, right? And with Higher Logic, one of the strong parts is microsites, right? So maybe my community has two different sides to it. One is more of a static informational section. The other is more collaborative. How can I set those microsites up so that it best suits my end users? Because in both cases, maybe these were previous problems that the client could not solve on their previous platform. So now how do we apply that to where they're going?
And I think that's a good point that John made is, what does work for you now? What doesn't work for you now? Kind of going back to what I mentioned earlier about ROI, like what are you needing to get? What makes your community successful is a big part of that strategy discussion. Then another one that I had written down is kind of outside of the migration. Let's say the migration is complete. That's not where our projects end typically. We have a customer success manager that then guides them and keeps moving and making sure that they're successful. Even after the migration is over, we have a robust reporting suite that helps them kind of gauge interactions and what people are doing on the community, more than just hits and clicks and views, but more like what is actually happening on the community is a big part of that discussion. But really for us and my team doing the migration is just making sure that we're successful getting the data over and kind of leveraging the new features or the features in our platform that they might not know about, and that we want them to use in the new platform. without having to do a bunch of customization.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason that you're migrating, right? Because
Yeah.
you want to grow engagement in a new platform. And I think, this is where I talked earlier about the 4 different phases that Erica and Brian had posted about. This is where we get out of the tech and content of it and start to look at the people. That's where you can really start to think about the strategy. And so I think the first and one of the most important things to do is to break your users out by persona and start to build a hierarchy, a group structure, so that users are seeing content that's most relevant. I always like to say people come to their community because they either want to get better at their jobs, they're getting insightful information, and when they get that, that's when your community becomes indispensable to them. And so that's really important for harboring growth and engagement. And then a lot of these platforms they have new features. For example, we have an advocacy platform. After 8 months of migrating and launching the discussions, roll that out and start to build brand champions. Roll out ambassador programs and user groups. What we do with Higher Logic, our champions get to beta test our products, and we set up beta testing groups. They go in and post about it, and then they'll go and endorse it in our community. So our customers start to go in and adapt it at higher rates, and then their users adapt it at higher rates. A true community launch is probably a 24-month process, right? Like, there's tearing the data and there's doing the true launch of it. And then I always kind of joke that it's kind of like a snowball, but it starts on a flat surface where you got to roll. And then after about 8 months to a year, it starts to pick up traction. And then after a year to 2 years, it starts to get into a big snowball that's rolling easily on its own. And so there's a lot of important phases that go into that. From the migration standpoint, the strategy side of it is just going to be, what platform are you migrating from? What are the data sources and what content? So that's the strategy that goes into that we've talked about previously. Mm-hmm. But this is where you start looking at the people and you start looking at the engagement and breaking them down by personas in a hierarchy.
I'm stealing that analogy now. I'm using definitely doing
snowballs and home improvement or moving. It's good. You're going to migrate during a blizzard, right? Is that how do you? Anyways, at the beginning of winter, right? Is that what you're suggesting, Michael, to migrate before it starts snowing, or right when it starts snowing?
Yeah, I think maybe to go with John's, maybe we should just be moving from the north to the south so we can avoid the whole process.
Oh, there you go. Even better. Yeah, no, ROI too, I think is a really interesting one. You guys kind of talked about it briefly there. Any thoughts on that? When you understand the use cases, how do you guys, do you guide clients on setting those things up, or do you kind of listen to the needs and kind of where they're at? Maybe they're a new community team or new community at the organization. But how do you guide them in kind of going, okay, here's what we're going to measure right after migration and then going forward, and how do you kind of set them up for success when it comes to measuring that business impact and value?
My personal opinion on this, and because every single new customer prospect that we talk to always talks about ROI, I really think it should be a phase 2. I think first you need to provide value to your users, get them content and make sure their questions are getting answered before you can think about how you're going to profit on this community. That in some ways defeats the whole purpose, right, of why you launched these. You want to help your customers. You want to get them data that's most relevant. Then later on, you can start going in and figuring out ways that you can monetize in some way. If you launch it correctly the first time, it's going to become a marketing machine for you, where you learn about what customers are asking questions about, what content they're most interested in. Some people like to measure ROI by ideas that are being submitted. If your largest customers are submitting ideas and you rolled that out, you have to go and take ARR and customer retention into the ROI of that piece of it as well. So I think every single customer prospect we have comes in initially with ROI. I would wait about creating customer value and then evaluating different ways, either from a marketing, support scalability standpoint, or a customer retention standpoint on how to measure the profit of the community.
And make sure you continue your metrics, right? Hopefully you're collecting either Google, Adobe, or some other traffic metric now. You're using your existing platform metrics now. And you may even be using a data service which is giving you specific metrics that are specific to your business, because your business is not, maybe has slight differences than the way another business is run. So making sure that transition happens. I can state that every platform has integration support for these analytics. We just want to make sure that they still get continued. And then, Michael, as you said, just keep that through the cutover, and then look at how those analytics can be correlated to your ROI calculations after the migration.
What would you guys say are the 3 to 5 top metrics, and there could be more than that, but for sake of time, we'll say 3 to 5 top metrics that you guys look for or suggest to clients to measure the success of the migration?
From a migration standpoint, specifically, let me take a step back and answer the previous question real quick. For us, like in terms of like reporting and kind of measuring success, and kind of from that standpoint, we have, from ROI standpoint, one of the key things that we like to push on is how many people are viewing verified answered posts. So if somebody is going in and viewing a piece of content that is a verified answer, it's potentially call deflection, right? That's one more support case that's not coming in. We're really big on self-service, and that's kind of where we want these support communities to be, is people finding their answers, not overloading your support team. A lot of self-service there. From a migration standpoint, it's really just about making sure the data comes over, is formatted correctly. I'm kind of going through those test cases. This is the best answer I can think of in terms of measuring that. Some of it does tie back into SEO in terms of broken links and are people not getting to where they need to be. But for the most part, it is going through test cases and making sure the data comes over as you expect it, is formatted properly. You got videos and images, and they come in different formats in different ways, and you're embedding them from all of these different platforms into the legacy platform, just making sure that comes over properly and successfully.
Yeah, I think from a migration reporting standpoint, what I always tell customers to do is have the content on read only for the first week, make sure that the SEO carries over and that users are able to navigate to it. It's not really a report you run, it's just more kind of like a beta process to go in and do. Once you're past that, the metrics I look at the most, Elijah, I totally agree, self-service. So how many questions are being asked, the percentage answered, the time to reply, right? So you want your time to reply to fall into your support SLAs to make sure you're scaling efficiently. Another metric that I find to be massively valuable is search terms. I really want to see when someone accessed the community what their search terms were. As an example, I'll pick on my own company. Our top search term in 2020 was our roadmap and our product roadmap. That had to mean either people had questions about it or they couldn't find it. It's now not even in the top 10 list because we started doing a quarterly webinar and then put the release notes right on the homepage. And then another big one is interactions by individual account. So by an interaction, I mean, maybe I join a discussion page, I like a post, I reply, I put in a hashtag. Those could count as 3 separate interactions. And what we found, higher interactions on the site, not just page views, but interactions, lead to higher NPS scores. And we also get a higher rate of referrals, video case studies, references when we see more interactions. And so we pass that data back to our Salesforce instance so we can start to build a customer journey and use CSM analytic tools to really build out a customer score there.
Excellent. All right, guys. We're gonna head into the final stretch here. Get loose. It's a rapid fire round. It's been fantastic, but we're gonna bring it on home. You guys ready?
Ready.
All right. So this is rapid fire. So this is a share a do and a don't. For the sake of time, we're just gonna share pick a do or a don't. But I'll start out with one of you, and then just share it, and then real quickly why, and then we're just gonna go on to the next one, and then that'll wrap us up. So Elijah, you're up first. One do or don't, and this is the context is what would you recommend a client do before, during, or after migration? We've kind of talked about the whole journey, but one do, one a do or a don't.
Okay, I got a do and a don't. Do, make sure you're going through the planning process. Don't skip it. You might want to skip it. It's going to take several weeks. You might want to go faster. Don't skip planning. It's important. My don't is don't change the structure of your data in the middle of the migration project. So what you have when we start, leave the structure. We'll reorganize it once you come over, but don't change mid project, kind of the house, the rooms in the house. Yeah.
All right. Thanks. And Michael, you're up. Do and a don't.
Yeah, so do include your users and your customers in the entire process. Ask them questions, interview them. We've talked about it a lot on this. Send out communications to them before the migration takes place. Include your champion customers in all of these conversations. Do not, I would say, what would my don't be here? Don't go into it. It's kind of like what Elijah was saying. Do not go in unplanned. I think most importantly, do not include all the stakeholders. Don't think that you can do everything yourself. John's point is correct about having one true point of contact. But if IT is doing a maintenance update for 2 days straight and you have something planned around that time, that's a problem. So don't not include all the proper stakeholders, and do include your customers in these conversations. Great.
Thanks. And John?
Yeah, I'd say my do is process related from the standpoint of, as a client, use your support channels. If you use a partner like us, you're going to have a whole team of people there to help you. But we're not the only people in charge of your success. We're working lockstep with the platform team. And so you have, the platform team will be the salesperson that you worked with to get you to this point. The technical support team, and the customer success team. So you have all the people around you to make your community successful. And so my recommendation is to use them, at all times. The don't is, don't sweat the discomfort of the present. Is this going to work? My blog doesn't look quite right yet, this and that. See the success of the future, because you're going to know that once you become familiar with the new way to administer and manage your community, that a few months from now, it's all going to feel right, like that comfortable glove. So, don't sweat that short term, because long term you're going to be running a successful community again.
All right, gentlemen, thank you so much. Excellent answers, contributions. We covered a lot in the last hour, so I just want to say thank you to yourselves and your companies, and for sharing this, and thank you everybody for tuning in. And we're going to wrap it up and go to questions. So thanks everybody.